The sky above Europe in 1940 was a battlefield unlike any other, clouds streaked with smoke, punctuated by the roar of engines and the flash of gunfire, where the fate of nations was decided not by infantry, but by men in metal birds slicing through the heavens at hundreds of miles per hour. And amid this chaos, one man stood apart, a general whose tactics were considered insane by allies and enemies alike, a man who looked at the Luftwaffe, the seemingly invincible air force of Nazi Germany, and saw not invincibility, but opportunity. While military analysts debated strategy in the comfort of distant offices, he studied the sky with a scientist's eye and a gambler's heart, calculating moves that seemed reckless, audacious, and utterly mad, yet carried the potential to turn the tide of war in weeks, not months. The world would soon witness how one crazy general's bold fighter strategy could shatter what no one else believed could be broken. It began with the Battle of France, where conventional thinking dictated cautious engagement, layering defense after defense, waiting for the Luftwaffe to commit and striking when predictable. But the general, known among his peers for a fiery temper and visionary insight, rejected convention. He believed speed, surprise, and concentrated aggression could cripple the enemy's morale and infrastructure faster than attrition ever could. Intelligence reports were brought to him daily, maps detailing Luftwaffe airfields, patrol schedules, maintenance cycles, and sortie timings. Where others saw overwhelming numbers, he saw patterns, vulnerabilities, and moments of opportunity. He issued orders that startled commanders. Fighter wings would fly deep into enemy territory without backup, striking targets that had been deemed untouchable, attacking supply lines, radar stations, and communication hubs before vanishing back into friendly airspace. Preparation was meticulous. Every pilot received not just tactical briefings, but psychological training to act decisively in moments of chaos. Aircraft were modified for maximum speed and maneuverability. Weapons loads were calculated to allow agility in dogfights, and fuel tanks were carefully adjusted to extend reach while minimizing drag. Squadrons practiced intricate formations that would allow them to split and regroup seamlessly over hostile territory, outnumbered but never outmaneuvered. The general's strategy was not merely to fight the Luftwaffe, but to predict and manipulate it, to lure enemy fighters into traps where superior coordination and cunning could turn quantity into liability. When the first wave of his audacious plan launched, chaos unfolded in ways that the Luftwaffe had not anticipated. Entire airfields were struck in hours, bombers caught on the ground, maintenance crews trapped in hangars, and radar installations temporarily blinded. Pilots reported German fighters scrambling in disarray, their formations fractured, their response slow and confused. The general watched the reports with a quiet intensity, eyes scanning, calculating, issuing new orders that pushed the tempo even further. In under a week, critical hubs were disrupted, and enemy morale began to falter. Newspapers in occupied territories whispered rumors of invisible attacks, of aircraft that appeared and vanished like ghosts, leaving devastation in their wake. The genius of the strategy lay in its combination of daring and precision. Whereas conventional doctrine focused on defensive superiority, the general emphasized initiative and relentless pressure. Fighter groups were rotated to maintain continuous engagement, ensuring that the Luftwaffe never had a moment to recover. Pilots flew multiple sorties per day, striking before repairs could be completed, exploiting every flaw in maintenance schedules, and attacking the very nerve centers of command. Each successful mission increased confidence, each failure became a learning moment, and the cycle of pressure and adaptation accelerated the collapse of the enemy's aerial dominance. By midweek, the results were staggering. Intelligence reports indicated that Luftwaffe operational readiness had dropped dramatically. Squadrons were scattered, fuel stocks diminished, and communication networks disrupted. The general had achieved in mere days what others predicted would require months of attrition and preparation. Commanders on both sides took notice. Allies were inspired, enemies alarmed. Pilots began to whisper tales of near-miraculous dogfights, of being outnumbered yet victorious, of a strategy that seemed mad to anyone who looked at the raw numbers but undeniable in its effectiveness. And yet, this was only the beginning. The Luftwaffe, humiliated and enraged, would respond with counterattacks of unprecedented ferocity. Entire fleets of fighters would hunt his squadrons across Europe, pushing his pilots to the brink. Losses would mount, Stakes would rise, and the general would face moments where one miscalculation could spell disaster, not just for his forces, but for the entire Allied campaign. Every decision was a gamble, every sortie a step into the unknown. But the audacity of his approach, striking fast, striking deep, and never allowing the enemy to regroup, ensured that even under extreme pressure, the initiative remained firmly in Allied hands. As the sun set over European airfields, smoke curling from destroyed hangars and shattered runways, the general reviewed his maps, calculating the next wave of attacks. Somewhere in Berlin, Luftwaffe commanders tried to make sense of the chaos, realizing that conventional tactics had failed against an enemy who played by no rules but his own. What they did not know was that this was just the first chapter, that the weeks to come would see the Luftwaffe crushed not by numbers, but by sheer audacity, ingenuity, and the relentless courage of men who trusted one crazy general's vision against all odds. The pilots, young men barely out of training, were thrust into the storm of combat with a sense of both terror and exhilaration. Flying machines that could outpace anything the enemy had anticipated, yet relying entirely on skill, instinct, and the mental gymnastics demanded by their general's unorthodox strategy. Every mission was a test of nerve. Every maneuver could be the difference between life and death. In one engagement over northern France, a squadron of 8 fighters entered a zone where intelligence indicated over 20 Luftwaffe interceptors were active. Conventional wisdom dictated retreat, regrouping, and waiting for reinforcements. Instead, the general's orders were clear. Engage aggressively, split the enemy formations, and attack key positions first. Pilots felt the weight of audacity as they dove, engines screaming, bullets streaking through the sky. And yet, under his plan, the overwhelming numbers became a liability for the Luftwaffe rather than an advantage. The enemy's formations faltered, collided mid-air, and several bombers were forced to turn back while fighters fled in disarray. Behind the scenes, the general coordinated not only air maneuvers but intelligence, communications, and supply chains with unprecedented precision. Signals officers intercepted coded messages, decoded them in hours, and relayed critical adjustments to each squadron mid-flight. Maintenance crews worked feverishly, performing rapid repairs under the pressure of continuous sorties. Mechanics became part of the offensive, ensuring that aircraft were always ready to launch within moments. Each segment of the operation was choreographed like a symphony, where even a single misstep could result in catastrophic losses. Yet because every layer of support understood the vision and trusted the leadership, execution was flawless. The strategy's brilliance also lay in psychological warfare. The Luftwaffe, accustomed to dominance, began to suffer from paranoia and overcaution. Pilots reported phantom formations, overestimated enemy numbers, and misjudged attacks. The general exploited these perceptions, striking at points where defenders were least prepared, then vanishing before countermeasures could be organized. News of these attacks traveled quickly, demoralizing German pilots and giving Allied forces a sense of momentum and inevitability. Victory, the general knew, was as much a matter of mind as machine. Crushing the enemy's confidence could achieve in hours what might otherwise take weeks of attrition. As the campaign progressed, the general's tactics evolved, integrating lessons from each sortie. Pilots adapted to improvisation mid-air, anticipating enemy responses and adjusting formations instantaneously. Engineers modified weapons loadouts, balancing speed, agility, and firepower with ever greater sophistication. Even logistical units were included in the feedback loop, ensuring that fuel, ammunition, and spare parts were always available exactly where and when needed. The entire war effort became a fluid organism, responsive, intelligent, and directed by the general's singular vision. By the second week, Luftwaffe losses were staggering. Airfields across occupied France and Belgium reported heavy aircraft damage, and replacement units struggled to respond effectively. The enemy command structure was paralyzed by the speed and unpredictability of attacks. Entire squadrons were grounded by minor supply disruptions, which under conventional strategies would have been insignificant. The general's foresight in combining rapid strikes with the disruption of logistics ensured that every victory in the sky was amplified on the ground. Each successful sortie became a multiplier, cascading effects throughout the enemy's defensive network. At the same time, the human element remained critical. Pilots were pushed beyond conventional limits. Fatigue, fear, and disorientation were constant companions. Yet morale remained high, fueled by a combination of faith in the strategy, visible successes, and the general's hands-on leadership. Reports from squadrons emphasized the sense of destiny, of participating in something greater than themselves. The general often visited airfields personally, speaking to crews, analyzing flight logs, and encouraging innovation. His presence reinforced the philosophy that daring, when combined with preparation and intelligence, could achieve what reason alone might deem impossible. Throughout these operations, the general's approach redefined aerial combat. Traditional doctrines of engagement, formation integrity, and proportional response were discarded in favor of rapid aggression, flexibility, and relentless pressure. Airmen who had been trained to adhere strictly to conventional maneuvers now relied on improvisation within a structured framework. The skies became a theater of controlled chaos, where the general's strategic vision guided each pilot toward objectives while allowing room for creative responses to unexpected threats. The result was unprecedented operational tempo and effectiveness. As the Luftwaffe struggled to respond, their infrastructure crumbling under continuous strikes, the general prepared for the next phase, a sequence of coordinated attacks that would not only destroy aircraft, but fundamentally shatter German command and control. By the end of the third week, the enemy would realize too late that the true assault had never been about raw numbers or firepower, but about strategy, foresight, and audacity, the hallmarks of a general whom many called crazy, yet whose vision reshaped the course of aerial warfare forever. The relentless tempo set by the general transformed the air war into a spectacle of precision and daring unlike anything the Luftwaffe had ever encountered. Every sortie was choreographed with meticulous timing. Squadrons launched from multiple bases simultaneously, converging on key objectives with split-second coordination. Pilots learned to trust not just their instruments or weapons, but the instincts of their comrades, relying on an unspoken bond forged by shared danger and guided by the overarching strategy of one audacious mind. Intelligence officers tracked enemy movements in real time, feeding information to flight leaders who adjusted trajectories mid-air, exploiting gaps in formations and targeting aircraft that were most vulnerable at that moment. Each engagement became a carefully calculated dance, blending anticipation, improvisation, and calculated risk. As the days passed, Luftwaffe pilots began to recognize the pattern, yet could not counter it. The general had instilled a principle that became the heart of his strategy. Initiative is the ultimate weapon. Instead of waiting for the enemy to strike, Allied fighters dictated the pace of battle, forcing German units into defensive reactions that made them predictable and exposed. Pilots executed sweeping maneuvers that drew enemy formations apart, isolating squadrons and overwhelming them despite numerical inferiority. Bombers were protected by fighter screens that were simultaneously aggressive and evasive, striking enemy fighters while maintaining the integrity of the mission. The Luftwaffe's technological advantages were neutralized by the combination of daring tactics and flawless execution. Back at command centers, the general's staff tracked cumulative effects with fascination and awe. Loss ratios were unprecedented. In many sectors, enemy aircraft were destroyed on the ground before they could even take off, pilots captured or forced into retreat, while Allied squadrons returned with minimal losses. The psychological impact on German aviators was profound. Morale plummeted as rumors spread of unstoppable fighters, of audacious attacks deep behind lines, and of a general whose methods defied conventional logic. Officers who attempted to predict the next move found themselves consistently outmaneuvered. The general's reputation as mad among colleagues became a shield, allowing him to implement plans that others would have balked at. Knowing full well that his results silenced skepticism, every detail mattered. Aircraft were maintained at peak performance with unprecedented efficiency, fueled and armed for maximum endurance, yet optimized for agility and dogfights. Pilots memorized terrain to exploit natural features for cover or tactical advantage. Formations were flexible, able to split and regroup as needed, and each squadron had contingency plans embedded within the general's overarching strategy. Training emphasized decision-making under extreme stress, and officers encouraged initiative within the bounds of strategic goals. No pilot flew blindly. Every movement was part of a living, adaptive system designed to exploit weaknesses the enemy didn't even realize they had. Midway through the campaign, the cumulative effect of these strategies became undeniable. Entire Luftwaffe wings were rendered non-operational, repair depots burned, fuel depots destroyed, and key airfields rendered unusable. German command tried to respond with reinforcements, but the general anticipated every move, adjusting squadrons to intercept or divert as needed. The speed and decisiveness of these operations became legendary. Pilots referred to it as the invisible hand in the sky, a force that struck where least expected and vanished before retaliation could occur. Every engagement reinforced the superiority of initiative, planning, and audacity over raw numbers or technological advantage. The human cost was significant, yet morale among Allied pilots soared. They witnessed firsthand the efficacy of their leader's strategy, gaining confidence in their own abilities as they executed maneuvers that were risky yet precise, aggressive yet disciplined. Observers noted that the general cultivated a mindset that embraced calculated danger, not reckless courage, but the informed courage of men trained to act decisively under pressure. Each mission became a lesson in adaptability. Each successful sortie a reinforcement of the principle that boldness, when guided by intellect and preparation, could achieve what brute force alone could not. As the campaign entered its third week, the general faced an unexpected challenge. The Luftwaffe began employing unconventional countermeasures, including decoy formations, camouflage, and rapid relocation of aircraft. Yet the general had already anticipated these tactics, incorporating contingency operations into every plan. Signals intelligence, reconnaissance flights, and the coordination of fighter sweeps ensured that enemy deception rarely succeeded. Allied pilots, conditioned by the intensity and rigor of previous sorties, adapted quickly, demonstrating that the combination of preparation, skill, and daring allowed even small forces to dominate larger, more conventional opponents. By the end of this phase, the Luftwaffe's dominance over Western skies had begun to crumble. Entire air units were forced into retreat, key installations destroyed or neutralized, and morale shattered. Yet the general, never satisfied, knew that the campaign was far from over. Weeks of intense operations lay ahead, each demanding greater precision, audacity, and endurance. The next engagements would test not only strategy and skill, but the very limits of human courage. For in the skies above Europe, the battle between boldness and convention had only just begun, and one mad general's vision promised to redefine the rules of air warfare forever. The intensity of the campaign pushed both men and machines to their limits. Pilots flew sorties back-to-back, often without rest, relying on sheer instinct honed by relentless repetition and constant adaptation to the general's evolving strategy. Each flight demanded precise judgment under pressure, from calculating the correct altitude and speed for interception to anticipating enemy maneuvers seconds before they occurred. Ground crews became an integral part of the offensive, performing rapid repairs, rearming aircraft, and refueling at a pace that seemed almost superhuman. The cohesion between airmen and engineers created a fluid machine, each component dependent on the other, yet empowered to act autonomously within the broader strategy. The general's audacity extended beyond tactical engagements. He initiated strikes deep into enemy territory where few dared to venture. Luftwaffe airfields that were previously considered untouchable now faced the relentless threat of attack. Pilots penetrated defenses with precision, exploiting weak points identified through meticulous reconnaissance and intelligence. Surprise was the cornerstone of every operation, and by maintaining unpredictability in timing, routes, and targets, the general ensured that the enemy never had the opportunity to mount a coordinated response. Each successful mission amplified the psychological pressure on the Luftwaffe, forcing commanders into reactive postures and making them increasingly vulnerable to further exploitation. The strategic brilliance was not only in the execution of individual missions, but in the orchestration of the entire theater of operations. The general coordinated multiple fighter groups across hundreds of miles, synchronizing attacks to disrupt enemy logistics, communications, and morale simultaneously. Pilots executed complex formations in the air that could adapt dynamically to changing circumstances, maintaining the initiative even under overwhelming pressure. Every sortie served a dual purpose: tactical disruption and strategic signaling, demonstrating to the enemy that control of the skies was no longer assured. The Luftwaffe, accustomed to conventional warfare, found themselves outmatched not in firepower, but in creativity and adaptability. Their attempts to counter the general's operations often resulted in misallocation of resources, fractured responses, and catastrophic losses. Pilots recounted being lured into traps where their superior numbers became a disadvantage, and entire squadrons were neutralized before they could regroup. The general's approach transformed each engagement into a multifaceted challenge for the enemy, combining aerial dominance with deception, intelligence, and psychological warfare. Amidst the relentless operations, the human element remained central. Pilots endured fatigue, stress, and the constant threat of death, yet their morale remained high, fueled by repeated successes and confidence in their leader's vision. The general's presence in airfields, reviewing plans, debriefing crews, and emphasizing ingenuity inspired extraordinary levels of initiative and resilience. The campaign became as much a test of mental fortitude as of skill in the air, demonstrating that leadership, vision, and audacity could magnify the effectiveness of every individual under command. As the campaign progressed, lessons from each engagement were rapidly integrated into subsequent operations. Tactics evolved dynamically, with pilots and squadrons adapting to countermeasures and learning from the successes and failures of previous missions. This feedback loop, overseen by the general, created an environment of continuous improvement and relentless pressure on the Luftwaffe. Commanders on both sides recognized the unprecedented tempo, with Allied forces achieving results in days that had traditionally required months of preparation. The synergy between strategic vision, pilot skill, and technological advantage produced outcomes that seemed almost miraculous. By the end of the fourth week, the cumulative effect of the general's strategy became unmistakable. The Luftwaffe's ability to conduct coordinated operations was severely degraded. Airfields lay in ruins, aircraft were destroyed or rendered inoperable, and pilot morale plummeted. Allied airmen had gained the upper hand, not through brute force alone, but through superior strategy, execution, and the audacity to act decisively where others hesitated. The general's approach exemplified the principle that a smaller, highly adaptive force, guided by vision and courage, could dominate a numerically superior opponent. As dusk settled over the European skies, the general mapped the next series of operations, aware that the enemy would not remain passive. The Luftwaffe would regroup, attempt counterattacks, and deploy desperate measures to reclaim control. Yet the general's strategy had fundamentally altered the nature of aerial warfare. Initiative, speed, and audacity had become the ultimate weapons. Pilots returned from missions with tales of near-miraculous victories, yet the general knew that the true battle was ongoing. A contest not merely of aircraft and bullets, but of vision, adaptation, and the relentless will to dominate the skies. The weeks ahead would test every skill, every decision, and every ounce of courage, as one crazy general continued to rewrite the rules of aerial combat. The cumulative impact of the general's approach became increasingly evident not only in the skies but across the entire theater of operations. Allied intelligence reported rapid deterioration in Luftwaffe readiness, with pilots forced into constant defensive maneuvers, aircraft grounded due to lack of fuel or parts, and command structures overwhelmed by the pace and unpredictability of the attacks. Each successful sortie reinforced the strategic doctrine that had been meticulously designed from the outset. Control the initiative, exploit every weakness, and force the enemy to respond on terms they did not dictate. Pilots, engineers, and support crews all moved in synchrony, a living organism operating with precision, each unit understanding its role yet empowered to act decisively within the overarching plan. The general's boldness was evident in the way he continuously tested boundaries. He authorized flights deep into hostile territory, targeting highly defended airfields and critical infrastructure. Enemy intelligence was often caught off guard, underestimating the speed, range, and audacity of these operations. When the Luftwaffe attempted countermeasures, the general anticipated them, adjusting flight paths, formations, and timing with an almost prescient understanding of how the enemy would react. Pilots reported that in every engagement, the margin between survival and disaster was narrow, yet the coordination and planning ensured that success was more probable than failure. This was not luck. It was the result of exhaustive preparation, adaptive strategy, and leadership that inspired absolute trust in those executing it. Even under extreme pressure, the general maintained a keen focus on innovation. Aircraft were modified to optimize maneuverability and firepower. Tactics were refined in real time based on reconnaissance and after-action reports. And intelligence networks were leveraged to identify and exploit enemy vulnerabilities. Each engagement became a data point, feeding back into the system to improve subsequent operations. The integration of reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and operational planning created a feedback loop that allowed Allied forces to stay several steps ahead of the Luftwaffe, turning each day into a cumulative advantage that compounded over the weeks of the campaign. The human factor remained central to the strategy's success. Pilots were pushed beyond conventional limits, facing fatigue, fear, and overwhelming odds, yet morale remained remarkably high due to their confidence in the general's vision and the tangible results they witnessed. Crews shared a profound sense of purpose, knowing that each mission, no matter how perilous, contributed to a larger, meticulously orchestrated effort. This psychological edge, combined with tactical superiority, magnified the effectiveness of every sortie and contributed to a cascading breakdown in enemy cohesion. The Luftwaffe, faced with relentless pressure, began to falter not only in execution but in confidence, illustrating the critical interplay of skill, courage, and strategic vision. As weeks passed, the pace of operations accelerated. Squadrons rotated rapidly, maintaining near-constant pressure on the enemy, striking at multiple locations simultaneously and exploiting every lapse in coordination or intelligence. The general's approach defied conventional wisdom. Rather than preserving forces for measured strikes, he applied relentless pressure to overwhelm, disrupt, and demoralize. Every mission was planned to create compounding effects: the destruction of aircraft on the ground, the disruption of logistics, and the erosion of morale all contributed to a cumulative degradation of enemy capability. Pilots learned to operate under extreme stress, executing complex maneuvers with precision, their actions coordinated by a leadership vision that emphasized adaptability, speed, and audacity above all else. By the final phase of the campaign, the Luftwaffe's capacity to respond effectively was shattered. Entire fighter wings had been neutralized, key airfields destroyed or compromised, and remaining units forced into defensive postures. Allied pilots reported encounters with enemy aircraft that were disorganized, poorly supported, and often forced into retreat. The general's strategy had transformed what seemed impossible into reality. A smaller, highly adaptive force had dominated a numerically superior opponent through skill, coordination, and daring. The psychological impact of these victories extended beyond immediate tactical gains, influencing subsequent planning, operations, and morale across both sides of the conflict. As the sun set over the European theater, smoke rising from shattered airfields and twisted wreckage, the general reviewed reports and charts, calculating the next series of operations. While the Luftwaffe struggled to regroup, his forces prepared for another wave of strikes, relentless and precise. The world had begun to recognize the extraordinary impact of his vision. Audacity, intelligence, and unwavering leadership could achieve what others deemed impossible. Pilots returned from missions with stories of near-miraculous victories, while enemies recoiled at the audacity and effectiveness of the tactics employed against them. And yet the general knew that this was only the beginning. The weeks ahead would test endurance, strategy, and courage even further, as one crazy mind continued to redefine aerial warfare, proving that vision and daring, more than numbers or technology, determined the outcome of battles in the skies. The skies over Western Europe had grown tense, heavy with smoke, engine roar, and anticipation, as one crazy general prepared to unleash the next phase of his audacious plan. Intelligence reports had confirmed the enemy's weaknesses: airfields stretched thin, repair crews overworked, fuel depots vulnerable. And yet the scale of what was about to be attempted seemed impossible to conventional military minds. Entire squadrons would dive deep into enemy territory without reinforcements, striking simultaneously at multiple strategic targets and returning with precision that defied expectation. Each mission carried the weight of potential disaster, but also the promise of rapid, decisive disruption. What the Luftwaffe did not yet understand was that their apparent dominance would soon crumble under a strategy that combined timing, intelligence, and daring in a way the world had never seen. The first wave of precision strikes began with an audacious morning assault on the airfield at St. Trond, a critical Luftwaffe hub in Belgium. Pilots briefed on exact enemy positions, coordinated their approach with minute timing, executing synchronized dives that left little room for defensive interception. Ground crews scrambled in confusion as fighters ripped through hangars, destroying aircraft on the tarmac and leaving the command center paralyzed. What appeared as chaos to the untrained eye was, in fact, a meticulously planned operation. Every pilot, every maneuver, every second had been accounted for, and yet there was flexibility built in to allow adaptation mid-flight. Reports from the field indicated total destruction of multiple aircraft, while Allied fighters returned with minimal damage. The enemy's infrastructure, which had seemed formidable, began to show cracks. The brilliance of the general's strategy lay in its integration of multiple components: reconnaissance, intelligence, flight coordination, and psychological manipulation. Scouts and spies provided exact information on enemy readiness, maintenance schedules, and weak points. Signals officers intercepted communications, allowing planners to anticipate enemy responses and adjust operations in real time. Pilots executed maneuvers with precision, targeting critical nodes rather than dispersing attacks randomly. Each strike was intended not just to destroy, but to paralyze the enemy's ability to respond effectively, creating cascading effects that magnified the results beyond the immediate damage inflicted. Ground crews were equally vital in this chain of execution. Maintenance teams prepared aircraft for rapid deployment, ensuring that fuel, ammunition, and spare parts were available precisely when needed. Engineers modified weapons loadouts for optimal performance under combat conditions, balancing agility, firepower, and endurance. The coordination between ground and air elements created a seamless operational network that maintained relentless pressure on enemy forces. As a result, even when confronted with superior numbers, Allied pilots achieved strategic objectives with minimal loss, demonstrating that planning, skill, and audacity could outweigh raw force. By midweek, the results of these precision strikes were undeniable. Luftwaffe operational capacity had dropped significantly, with multiple fighter squadrons grounded, fuel depots destroyed, and repair facilities incapacitated. Enemy morale deteriorated rapidly as pilots and commanders realized that conventional defensive measures were insufficient against a force that struck unpredictably and relentlessly. Allied airmen reported encounters with disoriented enemy pilots, witnessing firsthand the breakdown of coordination and cohesion. Each mission further reinforced the principle that initiative and audacity, when combined with meticulous planning, could dictate the terms of engagement, rendering numerical superiority meaningless. The general's approach was iterative, constantly refining tactics based on feedback from the field. Each sortie produced new insights: how to approach enemy airfields, when to engage in dogfights, how to avoid detection, and how to exploit minor lapses in coordination. Pilots became adaptive, executing maneuvers that allowed them to split, regroup, and strike targets efficiently, maximizing the impact of every aircraft deployed. This iterative process created an accelerating cycle of improvement, ensuring that the Luftwaffe could never predict the next move or regain initiative. In addition to tactical brilliance, psychological warfare played a critical role. The general's relentless operations instilled fear and confusion among German forces. Pilots reported unexpected attacks, phantom formations, and sudden losses, creating a climate of uncertainty and hesitation. Commanders struggled to maintain order as communication networks faltered and key personnel were incapacitated. The combination of precision strikes, overwhelming pressure, and psychological disruption magnified the strategic impact, turning isolated victories into a domino effect that destabilized enemy operations across multiple regions simultaneously. As the sun dipped behind the European horizon, smoke rising from shattered runways and burning hangars, the general reviewed intelligence reports, calculating the next series of attacks. The Luftwaffe, disoriented and paralyzed, had yet to understand the full scope of what they faced. Weeks of relentless precision strikes lay ahead, each demanding courage, skill, and unwavering trust in leadership. The stage was set for a campaign that would not only decimate aircraft and pilots, but also destroy the very foundation of the Luftwaffe's dominance. And one crazy general was orchestrating it all with audacity, foresight, and an unyielding vision that would rewrite the rules of aerial warfare forever.